Hello and good evening, I'm Melisa Idris.
I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Sarawak Chief Minister Datuk Patinggi Abang Johari Tun Openg has renewed his call for the territories of Sarawak and Sabah to be given 1/3 of the seats in Parliament. Now currently, Sarawak has 31 parliamentary seats and Sabah 25, which adds up to 56 seats. That's 19 seats short of a 1/3 in Dewan Rakyat. So Peninsula Malaysia has 166 seats in total, which exceeds 2/3 of the seats. Now this means that Peninsula can make changes to the federal constitution without the buy-in from Sabah and Sarawak. And this is important, right, Sharaad?
Yeah, I mean, if you taking aside the question of Labuan, Melisa,
Yes.
there are more philosophical questions actually underpinning this demand. I mean, of course, people will be asking why now to make these demands? Can these demands actually be met in the near term because of the way in which we have the ways in which the scheduling of redemarcation or redelineation happens? But there are very deep philosophical questions around the issue of equal representation, right? And what does equal representation mean? Is it about territory? Is it about population size? Is it about the promise of a federation based on territories coming together? Remember the original, we had 4 territories, Singapore left, and those seats were given largely to the peninsula.
Yeah, and it does seem that Sarawak is reiterating this call, saying that they do want to see more representation. I think this is very in line with what we've been hearing from the territories of Sabah and Sarawak, particularly wanting more autonomy, from Putrajaya wanting more representation. The question is, you mentioned timing, Sharaad, and this is also quite interesting, whether Sarawak has the leverage to be asking for this. The timing is also very important to note.
Yeah, I think the last couple of electoral cycles, have seen an increased capacity for the territories of Sabah and Sarawak to make demands on Malaysia as a whole. And I think it's not just about the political, I think, players, negotiating Malaysia. I think it really has to do with also us as citizens saying to ourselves, okay, what is it that we think fairness would be? What would equal representation be? And, and that might mean actually a competition between opposing values, the one man, one vote value, a principle, versus the equal representation based on territory and the origins of our nation, as it were.
I completely agree with you. Perhaps we need to think about the nature of the federation, whether that needs to evolve to have, I guess, more fairness. And again, it is how we think about fairness for all for our fellow Malaysians. And the question is whether this is something that can happen and should be on the table, at least for a conversation and a discussion right now.
Absolutely. I mean, in any democracy, you'd expect vibrant discussions around, electoral reform. This happens in Indonesia, which is, of course, in many ways much more, it's further down the road in terms of democratization that we are. Under the PH government, of course, there were a lot of conversations that had begun. Now, we don't know what the status of those discussions are when it comes to, say, electoral reform, balancing out some of the problems that we have, malapportionment, the question of the one man, one vote principle, the question, as Abang Jo has mentioned, the issue of where Sabah and Sarawak are in the federation. And I think these are exciting discussions that we all should be participating in, rather than discussions that, rather than having to suppress them. And I wonder if this government or the next will be able to, again, host these discussions, encourage them.
Well, let's try to have more of these discussions on Consider This on the show. We'll try and bring you a further, more in-depth look at this issue. But very quickly, another news. Today in Dewan Rakyat, for the PKR MP for Sungai Petani, Datuk Johari Abdul, he proposed that those who are about to enter university attend a militarized national service. So he mooted that the training be managed by the armed forces, and this is to avoid bloated programs and dubious contracts, issues that he claimed plagued the previous national service training program. So the NS program, if you recall, it was launched back in 2003. It was suspended for 2 years in 2015 before being permanently discontinued in 2018. Now, coming back to Datuk Johari's proposal, he claims that a military-style national service program will instill discipline and, quote, inner and outer strength, end quote. Now, I'm really not sure, Sharaad, what it is that some MPs think that the younger generation wants and need from their older elected representatives. Why is this still the thinking?
Inner strength and outer strength, I can tell you, basically, outer strength would be your core, right? But no, coming back to the decision, there's several parts of this, which is the idea that in the past, the National Service Program was bloated and maybe there was some mismanagement. The question is, putting it under the military, which is not exactly an institution that gets much scrutiny in this country, will that actually improve that question? I mean, the question of good governance. Okay. The other issue is, as you say, what is the purpose? Singapore has a national service system.
South Korea as well, yep.
Yeah, and they started very early, in the early days, because there was an imperative, at least they saw an imperative, to militarize in some ways their society against what they thought were enemies in their neighborhood. I mean, Malaysia and Indonesia were seen as potentially hostile. Right. And so there was this kind of survival push for that. Yeah. Do we have that? Do we need it?
At this point in time, this is very kind of war-like thinking that perhaps is legacy thinking. Perhaps we should be changing our thinking. And I do want to point out, the reason why this proposal was mooted, if I could quote Datuk Johari, he said, if you want the next generation to be disciplined and bolder, you should introduce national service. The idea is that so they don't depend on the government for jobs. I wonder whether the conversation seems to be missing the point here.
Absolutely, and the question is whether being part of the military makes you disciplined and independent, or disciplined but conformist. I mean, does the military as an institution, do actually uniform groups teach people to be self-possessed individuals with with independent thinking, or do they in fact create people who are more likely to observe that chain of command and respond from directives from the top? I mean, that's, I think, more likely than independent thinking and people who are not reliant on the state.
So I kind of wonder whether, it's missing the point, the conversations that youth perhaps look at Parliament and hope that they have some of the youth agenda, talking about jobs, talking about reskilling, talking about support for those who may need it. Now, I do want to say, though, that the NS program, the National Service Program, the idea of that was in part to foster unity, to foster patriotism, and perhaps there are other ways to be looking into that. I spoke to a few people.
Unity and patriotism, again, conformity as the objective of national service, not again, necessarily empathy, dialogue building, the vocabulary we need to understand and respect difference, none of which in many ways has been displayed by successive governments, often, attacking minorities and attacking marginal groups like the transgendered community.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and in just a few minutes, we're going to be looking at the high and the low points of the first week of this Parliament sitting. So stay tuned to consider this.
Susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan, pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Asrama Mahat Tahfiz Jawaban.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa.
Novel coronavirus yang seolah-olah masih tiada vaksin.
Elakkan pergi ke epicenter
kalau boleh lah.
Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa. Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. There was a real concern that because Parliament was not convened in a meaningful way earlier in the pandemic, the country is behind on the curve on COVID-specific legislation. Now, with this first substantial parliamentary session since the twin political and public health crises, expectations are high for progress on legislation that will address the pandemic and the expected recession. Joining us on the show now to discuss this further, we have Associate Professor Dr. Kartini Aboo Talib, Deputy Director of the Institute of Ethnic Studies at UKM. Kartini, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, let's begin with the positives first. I mean, what were some of the high points of these past few days of Parliament for you?
I think the high point is that the Perikatan Nasional Government, though led by a minority party, is really resilient and exhibiting it has succeeded the first test of convincing the other to lead the country and will continue to stand tall with the support from the coalition. Looking at the first week, it was quite fascinating observing every parliamentary member trying to make his point relevant. Some were serious, others were jovially countering questions and debates. But as the days moved, you started to hear unparliamentary languages used during the debates, which were quite common to me in any House of Commons, but those replicating the Westminster system.
Okay, so that unparliamentary behaviour, is that considered a low point for you? Was that the low point for the past few days for you?
I think the low point will be too many disturbances, inappropriate interruptions, which lead to good questions unable to be answered comprehensively. And worse was a comment made by the MP regarding towards Kasturi Rani, MP of Batu Kawan, to me was clearly sexist and racist, commenting over a women's makeup and skin tone. I mean, what was that? That was totally inappropriate to me. So I think it is really up to Art Harun as the Speaker. He has the discretion to determine whether or not to allow unparliamentary language to continue in the Parliament or give notice of warning, first, second and third warning, or face penalty or be warned to exit the Parliament for a certain period of time. That is the low point.
Kartini, this Parliament also made history in terms of the Commonwealth with the removal, without a real substantial reason, it said, of the Speaker of the House. What do you make of the removal of Muhammad Arif?
Well, I think it's going back how the selection. It is true, some say that it has to be open to the MPs to select. But yet again, there is a technical issue which has been addressed by Prime Minister itself, because the position has been empty for the last 14 days and it has been noticed, been given out. I think it really has to look at the technical aspect. But if you have to ask me how Art Harun is doing, I think Art Harun is doing well. And with his legal background, he can always leverage in instilling good ethics and installing order when convening session of the Dewan Rakyat, organizing debates, and also examining the admissibility of petition, bills and amendments. Good luck to Art Harun, I would say that.
Okay, well, I mentioned a bit earlier that there were concerns that the country is falling behind behind the curve in terms of COVID-specific legislation if you compare to many other countries around the world. Now, if you were looking back at this first week of the parliamentary sitting, Kartini, do you think that these concerns about COVID-specific legislation have been addressed?
Okay, I think the issue of COVID-19 was addressed indirectly, embedded in the question of the economic stimulus package. If you recall, you can see that the opposition did address this matter, but they were concerned over how the state spending in the name of safety and security combating COVID-19, rather than the legislation to institutionalize processes and methods for the nation and the well-being of the people directly. So I believe the debates will continue here and there until the Parliament can come to a resolution for legislation specifically for COVID-19. In this case, we have to wait. I think we have to wait.
Yeah, but this is interesting because many countries have moved very fast in order to address not just the pandemic, but also the expected recession, and a deep one at that. I do want to ask you, though, in terms of the removal of the Speaker, the question of the fate of parliamentary select committees, the issue of a long and standing kind of authoritarian culture and executive dominance, do you think this Parliament will be able to have scrutiny over any decision about the use of our resources, about a budget? Budgets can be asked for, but as the Auditor General's report suggests, money is often wasted through corruption, through mismanagement and so on.
I think they will continue the debates, whether here and there. And of course, the state has to address COVID-19 clearly. But at this point of time, too many people have so many ideas to table during the Parliament session. So we have to wait when they come to the point that they need to actually comprehensively find a resolution in terms of how the country deals with COVID-19. So at this point, they are still having a debate.
Right. So
let's allow them to debate first.
What are you expecting in the coming weeks of Parliament, of the sitting of Dewan Rakyat?
I think they should be more serious in terms of addressing issues addressed by the opposition or any MPs regarding how the state is spending in combating COVID-19, and the resolution move forward to help in terms of employability. The country needs that. And they need the Parliament to convince the people out there that the country is doing something for the nation.
All right.
Helping the nation, especially post-COVID-19.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Kartini. We appreciate your time and your insights. We're going to take a quick break. After this, we'll continue our discussion on this matter. Stay tuned to consider this.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, but if it's not...
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Asrama Mahat Tahfiz Jawabannya.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 7.45 lebih awal dari biasa.
Novel coronavirus yang seolah-olah masih tiada vaksin.
Elakkan pergi ke epicenter
Kalau boleh lah.
Kes-kes ni dapat dikesan dan dikuarantin di hospital ataupun di rumah.
Terdapat 86 rakyat Malaysia di Wuhan.
Sosial ekonomi Bumi Putera ini tidak boleh dipisahkan, tidak boleh dikurangkan ataupun ditinggal.
Pasal apa syarikat terugi? Kira sukses. The success is not necessary pada saya. Kalau kita nak menolong sesuatu.
Isra, apa benda Rancak TV ni?
Rancak TV ni adalah sebuah channel digital yang bernaung di bawah Astro AWANI.
Apa yang best sangat dengan Rancak TV ni?
Of course best, sebab dia ada macam-macam cerita. Dia ada cerita pasal isu-isu semasa, cerita pasal kesenian, cerita pasal hiburan, cerita pasal kecergasan, cerita pasal sosial.
Hi, thanks for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. This week, we saw the hashtags like hashtag Our Turn or hashtag Masa Kita trending on social media on posts about the frustration of young Malaysians over the behaviour of our older elected representatives in Dewan Rakyat. Now, many of the comments talked about empowering and voting in younger leaders as the new generation of lawmakers. Joining us on the line now, we have one of the organisers of the recent Parliament Digital Initiative, Jean Vaneisha, Secretary General of the NGO Challenger Malaysia. Welcome to the show, Jean. Now, there was a lot of focus about the conduct and the decorum of parliamentarians in the past few days, but there was also a lot of important issues of policy that were debated. Now, Jean, for many young people, do you think that the discussions on policy were overshadowed by the focus on boomers behaving badly?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's plain to see, right? It's not even a question of whether or not it was overshadowed by how they conducted themselves. But what is really telling is that this is not their priority. Policy making at this point is not a priority of lawmakers on both ends of the spectrum. And I think what was interesting from Parliament Digital is now that we've seen what it could be. Like we've seen how this ideal parliament could possibly conduct themselves in, but it's also shifted the focus back to but this is what it's like now. So it's given people a vision of very contrasting situations.
Jean, I mean, because Parliament Digital was not organised or structured around the adversarial structures of most parliaments, right? You have somebody in government, you have government backbenchers, and then you have the opposition or oppositions, as it were, who are then debating and asking questions and demanding answers from the other. Is that why the young people were able to pull off an assembly much more kind of respectful and much more like a series of debates rather than what an actual parliament would be? Even if we brought down the age, the ages of those individuals within Parliament, if Parliament would actually consider 25-year-olds, would it still be as raucous and as adversarial and conflicted as the current really existing Parliament is?
Interesting. Well, I have to admit, having no existing party loyalties or coming from government or opposition in a parliamentary setting it played a really big role in how we treated each other, and we have to recognize that blanking the slate does play in how well your ideas come forth. But at the same time, I don't think that by simply removing parties altogether and removing all positions altogether are the way to go. We could be looking at, I think it's really how you view what you are like if you are an elected representative, right? If you had this weight of, hey, this is what my constituent is saying and I'm bringing this into day one, you would conduct yourself in a way that is telling of what people expect of you. But yeah, I don't know if age is going to play a factor in whether or not we will conduct ourselves better, but at the same time, you have to consider that if young people are to come in now, what the intention is not to become prime minister or to hold a position or to make money from a certain thing. The intention is to serve a constituent, and I think that's what's most important and what we don't see in the Dewan Rakyat right now, and also why Parliament Digital was so, I don't want to use the word revolutionary because I might be inciting a war. But
it was successful, and it deserved the accolades that it got. Now I'm just wondering, Jean, what you thought, what you think the hashtags, hashtag Masa Kita, hashtag Our Turn, what do these hashtags represent to you and to the conversations that you observe?
I think it is what it is. It's us saying we're tired of how we're. I mean, you saw the conduct on Monday itself, right? We're tired of that sort of old politics. We're tired of not being listened to. We're tired of not just young people, I think, but Rakyat not being a center in all this. I mean, I wouldn't mind them arguing if they had us in mind, but they didn't. It really is very showing in what their intentions are. So Masa Kita, for me, means that it really is our time. We have to say this is what we want. We have to say, hey, we're willing to stand up in elections. We have to say, hey, we're only going to vote if you're bringing this policy. it's so much more than just a bunch of young people who are on Twitter saying boomers out. It also means this is what we are for. Like, I think there is a misconception. I feel like that we're just against old people, but what we are against is old inefficiency, and we're also willing to bring to the table a solution. The solution really is, stepping up and saying, hey, I'm ready.
Gina, I'm a young person masquerading as an old person, so you just forgive the look.
You can't say that on television, Sharaad. We can see you.
Gina, I do want to ask you, I mean, so this disenchantment with a particular type of politics, right, rather than the age of the person in politics, where is that leading? Where's that disenchantment leading? Is that leading young people to say we need to be invested in civil society, in the kinds of initiatives that Parliament Digital represents? Or does it say, well, we need to actually go into the political parties and try to transform the political parties because political parties are the vehicle? Or are young people saying, well, we should stand in the next general election and give everybody a run for their money?
I think it's all three. If there are people right now in political parties who just cannot move up simply because of how their party is structured and how there's this mentality of, the power distance of regular political parties, right? There could also be this third force that's coming up, and I don't want to say it loud, but it's getting there. I think we're going to hit a breaking point where all of us are just so tired. We're just going to announce, hey, we're starting a party. Let's start working at it. And at the same time, it doesn't stop there. I recognize, some people just don't want or cannot come in and participate at the political level, but they can contribute to civil society. I think there's also been a vacuum since 2018, like when we won. The civil society does need a revamp as well. So the young people everywhere, I think they should be taking this opportunity to come out and ask how can they contribute.
Okay.
And there are existing NGOs, there are existing groups of people that they can talk to. Like right now really is the time to mobilize and
Jean, if I could very quickly come back to the parliamentary sitting that we've observed in the past few days, the sexist comments by MPs and politicians directed to their female peers, how much of that do you think will dampen the interest of young women to enter formal politics, you reckon?
I don't think it was dampened. Like for me, I was angered enough to want to say something, right? We have to look at the bright side of all of this. I know, and it's very hard because this is not the only incident in history in which a minority has been called a name. You have to remember, this is just one day. But with the current energy now, I think we're tired enough about, unemployment statistics right now and our response to COVID. It's not this. We're just looking for further trigger points to mobilize at this point, right? I think Malaysia right now wants to take action, and politicians should be terrified. That regular people are saying, hey, you're not doing your job, so I'm going to come after yours.
Okay. Was there anything related to the youth agenda that you observed in Parliament the past few days?
Related,
that championed
really.
or at least talked about or touched on the youth agenda. Anything?
I wouldn't. If there was, maybe I missed it. I mean, all of the thing that really bothered me was when they called Sadiq Cucu, and that turned into its whole thing as well. So I don't want to say that that's part of an agenda, but it can be an agenda point. No, I don't see myself being discussed in Parliament.
Okay, well, hopefully there's still more time to come, but this is the first week. It's week 1 of the Parliament sitting, so we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for what comes up in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Jean. Now, that's all the time we have for this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan, signing off the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night, folks.